That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and today I am joined by a good friend. We've known each other for years. I've been an admirer of his work. He is, you may know him from Sense Soapbox, as well as the creative force on the Return on Ideas. Please give it up for Sean Malone. And if this was a point where if it was actually a show,
screaming crowds,
people would be giving it
cheering. I'd have a standing ovation, probably. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I don't actually think that. Hey, Lou, nice to see you, man.
Nice seeing you. So we Sean and I we've known each other for a while, and we actually got to work together.
Probably like 12 years, maybe.
Might be something like that. Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. We've seen each other lose hair, I guess. Or
no. Well,
did I ever watch you lose hair?
I don't think you ever. I don't think you ever saw anything other than this.
Other than that, yeah. Like, I don't like change.
I used to do peach fuzz,
Oh, okay.
And then I thought, no, full razor.
Well, if you let it go, where's your hairline?
Oh, I saw it the other day. It's starting to. It's doing one of these. You got one of the little bit of that, but like it's mostly one of those. It's But I was like 23 when that started to happen. So and my hair was awful before that. So it was not even a hard choice. I was just like, get rid of it. It's gone.
Well, I never realized that I was losing my hair until everyone who hates me online points it out. Anyone who doesn't like me, they're like, oh, nice forehead. Or like, yeah, tell that to your hairline. And I'm like, I didn't know. I didn't know.
I think my brother is still, he's still fighting that battle. Like he's still, I don't think he's convinced yet that it's happening, but it's happened to all of us.
If he's a listener,
he probably is.
I think you'll
I'll call him out.
This is our intervention. We're very passive aggressive as far as doing this. Well, Sean and I, we got to work together for a while on Sense Soapbox, which is a series, an animated series that FEE does, the Foundation for Economic Education. And I look at that and I'm like, oh man, I think I worked with you for 20 episodes of that. I mean, if this was Hollywood, I'd be getting some residuals. That would be pretty dope.
Yeah, if this was Hollywood, I'd be getting residuals for that. But
alas, big time. Yeah,
it is not. But Sense Soapbox, I'm really proud of. We started that in 2017. I was for the listeners who don't know, I was the creative director and sort of head of marketing for the Foundation for Economic Education for about 7 years. And in that time, I basically built the YouTube channel from scratch and multiple channels ultimately because Sense Soapbox has its own. But I did Out of Frame, which was my video essay series, fairly popular. When I left FEE, I stopped doing that. But we kept doing Sense Soapbox because Seamus Coughlin, who also does Freedom Tunes, which is another animated show on YouTube. If you haven't seen it.
Very talented dude.
Very, very funny, very, very talented guy. But he and I still enjoyed doing it. We still wanted to do it, and FEE was kind enough to continue funding it. And so we've been doing it for over 7 years now. We're into what officially in my playlist structure is season 10. Wow. Although that's a little bit of a misnomer because I just did seasons. The first season was like the last 3 months of 2017, so it doesn't really totally count. But I'm really proud of that show. We've done well over 100 episodes at this point, and millions and millions of views. I'm just really, really proud of it. It's really awesome.
Yeah, there's some bangers in there. My favorite part of working with you guys on that was developing Florida Man, which was
oh my gosh. We get so much mileage out of Florida Man now too. I have Florida Man doing shorts.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah. If you haven't seen him, I have like Florida Man like explaining things. Like he's just sitting on the porch in his little swamp house with alligators floating around. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think we did a good job playing up kind of like the physical characteristics of Florida Man, or what you would think. Like the guy literally rides an alligator, but yet he has that that down home wisdom where he actually understands what's going on a lot better than a lot of
Florida man swagger with like actually some intelligence behind it, which is, you know, maybe not what you always think of with Florida man, but also I think Florida man is, you know, we make fun of Florida man in our culture a lot, but Florida man is also pretty ingenious. He's somebody who's industrious, who's, you know, figures out how to solve problems, right? Like Florida man is, and also Florida man is an American flag in a hurricane, you know? I mean, it's woo! Like that's what I think of when I think of, I don't just think of the alligator wrestling version of Florida man.
You know, there's a series I watched, a short docu-series called It's Florida, Man. Have you seen it?
I have not. I'm aware of it. I've seen it advertised to me, but I have not checked it out.
And they do a really good job. I think it's a short series. It's probably about like 6 episodes. And we watched it on, I don't know if it's an HBO series, but I think we did watch it on HBO Max. And each episode takes a real life story out of Florida. It has the real participants, you know, doing like narration, telling their stories, and then cutaways to reenactments with.
I like that. I like that approach a lot.
Yeah, and
like kind of a drunk history approach.
Yeah, exactly, and you'd recognize like a lot of the actors in there, and yeah, it is like the stories that come out of Florida they are completely unbelievable. Like, and yet they're there. So it's like. I don't know, it's sort of like a magic, you know, happening down there, because there's so much wild, crazy stuff just on the human level. But then
I love stuff like that.
Yeah,
because you never really know where the story's going to go, which is super fun. But also, there's this, you know, I'm somebody who always, you know, and who's spent a lot of time actually like producing content and things like that. So I'm pretty sensitive to like fake stories and pretty sensitive to stories that are exaggerated in certain ways or whatever. And honestly, part of it is just because I know how easy it is to manipulate people through editing, through writing, you know, social media posts are really not trustworthy to me most of the time. Right. So I tend to try to look into things whenever I can. And in the Florida man stories are always like, there's gotta be more to it than that. Right. You're always like, no, that can't be what happened. And a lot of the time you go like, no, yeah, okay. That guy was just like on a boat and then the alligator jumped in and he threw a beer at its head. You're like, yeah, okay. Well, that happened. Apparently that was a thing.
Yeah. One of the stories, one of the episodes involves a guy who got his arm bitten off by an alligator, and just the visual of, you know, just looking at this guy and he looks like he's pretty, you know, he's pretty fucked up or methed out. I don't know what he's on. I mean, he could very well be very high on the new life that he has because he survived it. But just like the visual itself of looking at this guy wearing a shirt, you know, I start thinking of things like, oh man, like, you know, you lose your arm, but you don't give up regular shirts. Like you're still wearing regular shirts. And I was thinking, I don't know if I tweeted it out, but I'm like, you know, if anybody knows me, if anybody's a buddy of mine and we haven't seen each other in a while and we run into each other and you're missing an arm, like you gotta explain it. I shouldn't have to bring it up. The very first thing you should be like, oh my God, Lou, I haven't seen you in a while. By the way, yeah, I lost my arm in a really weird, you know, in a weird way. And here it is, you know.
Man. Yeah. All those stories are wild, dude. But it's like every day now. I mean, it's hard. Like social media is just so utterly full of insane stories, you know? And so it becomes like, I feel like Florida man, when you and I were growing up, I think it was more like, you know, kind of a wacky news segment, you know, like some weird thing happened in a part of the country, you know, it's like usually Florida man or maybe Texas man, you know, like sometimes, and they do something wild. And the occasional, like you get, you know, somebody from Arkansas or the Ozarks, you know, like something somewhere, somehow you'd get some of these kinds of stories. Now I feel like my social media feed is just full of that level of insanity that seems too good to like too crazy to be true.
Yeah.
And so much of it is like I don't know. It's tough because like you can't really track everything or verify everything, and it's just the world is too absurd.
Yeah, and how much stuff is dependent upon local reporting.
Yeah. If we only got like the one interstate story a night, then you've got time for one Florida man story. But if you've got the entire floodgate of the internet open, you've got the local reporting from literally everywhere on the planet with every crazy thing that anybody's ever done.
I wonder if every country has like its own Florida man.
They must.
There's like someone in Mongolia is doing some wild,
probably
some wild stuff.
And honestly, I hope so, because like I often find those kinds of stories to be like humanity affirming stories in a lot of ways. Like somebody just doing something bonkers. You're like, yeah, that's cool. That's the kind of thing that humans should. I mean, granted, like there's Darwin Awards element to a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
But I'm glad that people are still like free enough that they're doing crazy things sometimes. It's a good time.
Yeah, it is sort of. I know Charles Cook from National Review is described like America is where the weirdos go, and in the best sense possible.
I love it.
He's like,
I love it.
He's like, he's a big roller coaster aficionado.
I didn't know that about him.
He's really into roller coasters, and it's like, well, where else are you going to do it? You're going to have like people are going to go wild.
I have never really thought about that before, but roller coasters definitely feels like a very American kind of thing, because it's like a little nuts. It's a little bit dangerous. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was a lot dangerous, I'm sure, when it started, right? And it's probably less dangerous now. But like, I can't imagine how many people got like thrown off of roller coasters when they first started, making these kinds of things. But like, it's such a weird thing. And then you look at like the EU, where my wife showed me a video of the EU regulations won't allow people when they're christening ships. They won't allow you to just like take a bottle and smash the bottle on the side of the ship.
Oh no.
So the EU regulations required them to build this contraption that holds the bottle in place, and it's got a big long fulcrum lever on it. And then you're supposed to like let the lever drop and the bottle falls down, and you're not really anywhere near the bottle. And it's this whole thing. And my wife sent me this video yesterday of like an EU official trying to christen a new ship with this process. And it just like the bottle went down, didn't break. He pulled it up again, dropped it again, didn't break, pulled it up again, dropped it, didn't break. Eventually, like he kind of rattled a little bit, dropped it again. The bottle then like broke free of the contraption and it just fell in the water and still didn't break. And I'm just like, this isn't actually that hard. You can literally throw a glass bottle at a ship. It will break. I promise. Like if you actually just huck it at the ship. But like the EU is so like risk averse, and like all of that stuff is like you just been regulated out of being able to do anything, and a lot of times really normal stuff, that. I think like that's a tradition, a sailing tradition going back centuries, and no, the Europeans can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Cook definitely uses roller coasters as a if not the main argument against socialism, at least one of them.
Oh, it's a good one.
And a planned economy, because it's like in no planned economy are there any bureaucrats saying, what we need people to be able to get into a little cart and then move along this track, and then sometimes they'll go upside down.
Maybe they'll go upside down. Maybe they'll take a corner so hard that you're like literally sideways half the
just
time.
Don't get that.
Like, Did you ever watch the video of? Do you know who Richard Wolff is? The
PS5 one.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you explain that? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So Richard Wolff is I will very loosely use the term economist. He is officially a PhD economist. He might be the worst of all time.
Yeah.
But he's a communist. Like he's actually like a self-identified communist who makes economic arguments for communism, which aren't very good. And a while back, like it's probably a year ago now, more. My sense of time is always pretty bad, but like I imagine it was about a year ago. He did a video explaining to somebody in like a webinar or video chat or whatever that he was doing. He was explaining to them how communism socialism would produce a PlayStation 5. And it was phenomenal because it was real. Like, it was actually a real answer. Like, it is actually
and a genuine question too. It was almost like a
genuine question.
And I have no idea where the person who asked it, where they were coming from.
Well, I don't know either.
Because you would think
it kind of just sounded like they wanted to know.
Yeah. It was a genuine, a curious question, and it would seem like a layup to somebody who has been studying this. It's like, oh yeah, this is how you get a product like that under socialism or communism.
And the thing is, I think he did think it was a layup because he explains it in a really matter-of-fact, very straightforward way. And he says, well, what you would do is you and other people who wanted a PlayStation 5 or something like that would go to your whatever bureaucratic agency is responsible for developing technology, and you would persuade them that the PS5 is good and that you should have them develop a game system, and then it would be a series of votes, and you would have a say on everything,
on whether other people can whether you can own it is dependent upon your comrades.
And then you would try to get the entire country to vote on whether or not we could develop and build and sell a PlayStation for you. And and that process would be super democratic and all whatever. And it's just like, anybody who watched that would be like, yeah, okay, so literally will never be made,
right?
Because you understand that you cannot get people to vote on that. And also, it's like the old thing that Steve Jobs said. I'm going to butcher the quote for sure, but when talking about the iPod, he had said, and it's very old.
You're dating yourself with the iPod, yeah.
Well, I was going to say Henry Ford. Right. I'm going to date myself. I'm not going to date myself to Henry Ford, but Henry Ford said something very similar. But what Steve Jobs said is, if I just asked people what they wanted, they'd tell me they wanted a better CD player, right? Because they don't know what the entrepreneur is envisioning yet, right? And it was like Henry Ford said, and again, I don't know if this is apocryphal, if I'm butchering the quote or whatever, but Henry Ford had said something similar when he said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd tell me they wanted a faster horse. Right. If you only see a horse, then an automobile, which is in some inventor's imagination, is going to be really hard for you to understand. Right. And it's the same thing with, like, you've got a CD player, you kind of know how that works, or you know how to use it anyway. And then somebody comes up with this like weird tiny little device that fits in your pocket and has, thousands of CDs worth of content on it. That's magic. That's unbelievable, right? It doesn't even make sense. I wouldn't guess that, right? And certainly no bureaucrat is going to guess that.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get them to imagine, oh, you know what we could do? I mean, the EU can't even imagine that in 5 years there might be a new USB standard. Like, they're now stuck in like USB-C, and they're very proud of themselves that they've regulated it so that every device comes with a USB-C port. And you're like, you understand that USB-C was like the latest in like decades of development, and we don't have to stop there. Actually, we could get faster data transfer. We could get, more, better form factors, things that don't break as much. They're all these solutions that you've regulated away, right? Like, you've regulated away even the option of trying at this point.
What do you think is sort of, behind that desire to, over-regulate everything? Because obviously, I've heard about, there's, like the New World Order kind of stuff, and one government, and the more like, I guess conspiratorial sort of thing. But just what I want to say is, like, with like, for example, even the christening of the ships, like, there's regulating how are you going to do that. It's like, how the fuck did you people conquer the world? Could you imagine, like,
not like that?
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, like, not even taking the risk of a broken wine bottle on a
I know. Yeah, if you can't take the risk of like smashing a wine bottle on the side of the ship, how are you allowing people to get on the ship?
Yeah,
it's going in the ocean.
Yeah,
the ocean's really, really dangerous. Like, it's crazy. The idea of crossing the Atlantic is an insane thing to do.
Well, it turns out the iceberg that sunk the Titanic was just a gigantic, bottle of Chablis or some other thing.
That's right. Brute. Maybe,
Brute, yeah.
So. But no, I don't know entirely. I mean, look, I do think part of it is just there's like an element of safetyism for people, that just like everything, every time you make one thing a little bit safer, a little bit easier to use, a little bit better, the bar moves, right? Like wherever it is that you think like we have to, in order to live as human beings, we have to be like Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with like physical safety, right?
Right.
But that bar has expanded a lot, where you go initially it's like physical safety. Well, that from a governmental standpoint means, we want to make sure that there's laws against murder and rape and assault and things like that. And we want to make sure that people's property is protected and people aren't getting mugged and robbed and, vandalized, or, preventing arson, stuff like that. Right. And make sure that people aren't murdered or injured in some way. And then sort of the next phase of that is like, okay, well, let's start talking about safety within sort of privately contracted realms, right? So it's like, let's make sure your workplace isn't full of hazards and dangers and things that you would knowably injure people, right? Like we want to make sure that if you're moving heavy machinery or if you're moving heavy objects, that like you've got straps and chains and things that are, stopping them from falling on you and things like that. Or, we don't have toxic chemicals all over the place. Okay, that all makes a lot of sense. But after you've solve those problems, you still have a bunch of agencies that are dedicated to solving the safety problems, right? So, right. I mean, I think the iron law of bureaucracy really is just that they will eventually become not dedicated to whatever mission they were formed to address, but they will become dedicated to furthering the bureaucracy.
Well, they need to innovate their role,
right?
I guess, by creating new ways. Yeah,
right. Regulatory entrepreneurship is it's sort of the inverse of private market entrepreneurship, which is like the regulators are actively looking for gaps that haven't been regulated to death yet, so that they can continue to justify their existence. They can continue doing that. Now, I don't know if that's just like. For some people, I think it's just mindless, right? Like for some people, I think it's just, this is what we do. And therefore we will just continue to do it whenever something arises that we can do. But some of it, I think, is just authoritarian instincts, like I think a lot of it is people like, you look at like Thierry Breton, one of the EU guys.
Oh,
who was threatening Musk over free speech.
Oh, the speech stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just think that guy wants to be a dictator.
Right.
Like I don't know that guy has any actual like principles. Well, he probably does have principles, but his principles are, the government should control everything because we're smarter and better than the serfs. I am the expert. I am the one in charge. And so I get to make all these decisions and you don't, you dumb hick, So I think there's a lot of it that's that. And you certainly see that in America too. I mean, there's certainly like the sort of like coastal elites thing. A lot of that angers people because what it is condescension aimed at the rest of the country all the time, right? It's like, well, I live in New York and I'm smart and I'm better than you. And I know all the things and I've got all the right friends and the right opinions and all this stuff. And you, whatever Duck Dynasty guy, you're an idiot in a camo hat who shoots ducks, right? So I should be able to tell you what you're allowed to do. And I think, I've certainly been around enough college professors over the years to sort of get a sense that I don't know if it's like connected to intelligence or connected to education directly, but there's definitely no shortage of people in that sphere who believe that having a PhD, having an education, whatever, having a high profile job means that they should have the authority to control other people.
Yeah, I had a guest on, Lisa Sellen Davis, and one thing that we were talking about was the thing about like academics, and like say you go to school and you're taking this course about literature through a Marxist lens, etc. And it's like they don't actually have to make anything. When your whole world is just, ideas. And,
you can literally live entirely in your own little bubble and you can create that.
So where you don't actually have to, build anything or, say, hey, can we build a ship that could withstand a champagne bottle, on the and on the the coastal elite stuff, which is so funny because I guess
you're coastal elite.
Yeah, I am. Damn right. I think a great example of that condescension is someone like Michael Bloomberg, who I want to
oh my God, yeah.
I want to remind people like
I mean, I lived in New York under Bloomberg.
Yeah. And for the most part, like I enjoyed living in New York under Bloomberg. But what I found so interesting was, here was a multi-billionaire who owns like Bloomberg News, who can get his voice out, right? And there was no way that he could persuade people not to drink big gulps, So since he couldn't persuade people, he needed to use the strong arm of the government to try to coerce people not to drink that. And I think
he wrote a rule. By the way, I don't know if you remember this or not. He wrote a rule saying that it would be, and I don't know if it ended up being enacted or whatever, but the rule was that if you were a bicyclist in New York, you had to keep your feet on the pedals at all time.
How's that even work?
It's not. I'm not really. I mean, I assume they probably would have stipulated that while riding, not while whatever. But like hands and feet on the bike constantly, because somebody one time, no look, ma, no hands, and then ran into a bus or something. Who knows?
Right. Yeah.
But that was Bloomberg. Like Bloomberg, all Bloomberg's instincts were we just have to use the state to like control everybody. And I also like living in New York in that era, except for most of that stuff hadn't really been enacted yet, right? Like it was all being proposed.
Yeah. The big
like all
thing was proposed,
the movie theater, soda, like shrinking soda sizes and all that kind of stuff. Like,
and I was like, man, I had already like quit soda by I don't know how many years when it came about. And I'm like, oh God, am I gonna have to like in protest, start drinking fucking Mountain Dew?
I never stopped.
You never stopped.
We'll plug Coca-Cola. Maybe Coke will sponsor your show.
on when Bloomberg passes away, you'll be on his grave, just downing that big old.
Dude, I was so I was this, but your audience obviously won't. But I went to school at New York University for grad school, and I was in the music. I got a music composition degree, but below. The floor in the Steinhardt building at NYU, the music department is one floor above the nutrition department. Not really sure why, but that's just how it worked out. And a weird facet of those buildings is that the men's and women's restrooms alternate floors. So if you are on a floor with the women's room, you have to go up or down to get to the men's room. Okay. And so quite a lot of the time I was on a floor that was the bottom floor. It was like the bottom floor of the music department, but below it was the nutrition department. And that floor had a women's room. So I would go down to the nutrition floor to use their restroom.
Okay.
The story is because what was always interesting to me about that was that I would walk right by a bulletin board and like a case that the nutrition department had of all of its various wins. And every single one of their wins, every single thing that they put up as like the big bulletin banner that said, yay, we achieved X, Y, and Z as NYU's nutrition professionals, blah, blah, blah. Every single win was regulatory. Every one. Every time they're like, yay, this week we banned salt in such and such. Or this week we convinced the government to ban large sodas, or we made it harder for Burger King to advertise, or we stopped people from eating beef in schools, or whatever it was, right? Like it was all that kind of stuff. The entire department seemed to be dedicated, not really to teaching people like what is good or bad nutritionally, but on like controlling human behavior.
Yeah.
And it always stuck with me. Like I walked by it, probably every other day or so. And we would see more and more of those kinds of things again and again and again. There are certain professions that seem to just be dedicated to that kind of stuff. Like professions on like how to stop people from doing things.
Did you ever feel like a way to push back was to just go into that women's room and just piss everywhere?
I did not.
After, you're drinking your Diet Cokes all day.
It was so long before all of the trans bathroom stuff that it just wasn't really wasn't on my radar at that point, that was an option. But Now you could just declare yourself whatever you want.
Yeah.
Go in there. And then fight the patriarchy, right?
Yeah, that's the way I want to fight the patriarchy. If I can fight the patriarchy by just like blowing, just figuratively blowing up a women's restroom.
Yeah, I mean,
it might have to be done.
You can. I mean, think about Zuby. If you remember, Zuby did the deadlift record.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, you can just declare yourself whatever you want and then go blow it up. Have fun. And to be clear to the FBI listening to this, blowing up does not mean explosives.
Yeah, it could mean doing a number 2. It could also mean taking pictures and later blowing up what you find in there. Sean, I want to when we were talking about Florida and Florida Man and how weird and amazing Florida is, I was wondering if David Lynch had ever done a movie based in Florida. Because there's just something about at least the David Lynch stuff that I've seen that has like a Florida Man vibe to it, in kind of the weirdness to it.
I love that after David Lynch died, there was that quote that was going around, which was like everybody gets mad when art doesn't make sense, but they're perfectly fine when life doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, fair, David Lynch, fair.
Yeah,
you can do some absurdist things, and like Twin Peaks is. It's like a coherent narrative with so much bizarre stuff just around it, like it makes sense. It's a good mystery. It's a good detective series.
I haven't finished it, but I remember talking with my friend Erin, going back and forth on text, like while it was on, and she was a huge fan of it. And she had watched it, right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I was watching for the first time and I'm like, I find myself not laughing at the jokes and laughing at the stuff that aren't jokes.
I think that may be what David Lynch intended, to be honest. I think the whole thing was built around such absurd premises, and like the characters, particularly Kyle MacLachlan's character, is just so strange, like I don't really know how to describe him other than just to say like it's this completely upbeat, fully optimistic FBI agent dealing with the darkest stuff in the world in just a random obscure town.
Right.
What the heck? What a random, but fantastic. But no, I can't think of anything. Maybe somebody who's more of a student of David Lynch than I am would know that he did something in Florida. But the thing that made me think of right off the bat, it's a very different kind of movie, is if you ever saw The Florida Project, starring Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Yeah, I saw it a while ago. I didn't like it.
That's a really interesting one to me.
I hated the children.
Did you know that they were not actors?
They were very good at what they were doing.
They were the residents of that tenement building.
Oh God.
Yeah, they were. That was real.
Yeah.
He literally, I think Willem Dafoe and maybe like 2 other people in that movie were paid actors, like professional actors. I don't mean paid actors.
It wasn't Amy Adams. It was
no.
Was it the woman from? She had a small part in like Boardwalk Empire, I think.
Oh yeah, I don't remember.
Paz, maybe your last name is Paz or something like that.
It's been a minute since I've watched it, and our conversation is why I thought of it. So
yeah, it's
I didn't come in prepared here, but yeah, that I always thought was that was like, to me, very pure, low class Florida on display.
Yeah, I mean it's so funny because I saw the movie once. I mean, God, how many years ago? And I remember, and the disgust that I had for everybody involved, except maybe Willem Dafoe's character. But
he was trying his best, man.
The kids in particular, has just stuck with me, and it's really a shame because I think about what other important memories from my life have been just stricken from the record of my brain. Oh God, now I'm really like kind of disgusted just thinking about those kids. But what I wanted to bring up about David Lynch is kind of a similar thing, not one of disgust or necessarily, but when he passed away, I immediately thought about when I was at NYU and I studied abroad in Madrid, and it was the year that Mulholland Drive came out, and we all went to go. Me and my friends in Spain went to go see it in a movie theater. And what was really attractive about movie theaters in Spain was that they serve beer. it's something I wasn't used to. Like, wow, man, you can actually like,
not New York.
Yeah, you could get like a fucking 20 ounce of beer and watch this movie in English, Spanish.
Not that it stopped anybody from being drunk in a New York movie theater, by the way. But
right? No, totally. And and I remember watching Mulholland Drive and watching it and just being like at times literally going like rolling my eyes and verbally going, oh my God, just like, this is so stupid and so over the top and so ridiculous. And oh my God, I can't believe, like, thank God they're serving beer here, because there's no other reason why I'd want to see this fucking movie. And then it ends. And then for the next 2 weeks, I can't think of anything else but this fucking movie. Like it's haunting me. It's implanted in my brain, all this stuff that's going on. And I'm like, holy shit, that's what, like, for me, that's my relationship with David Lynch. It's like, oh my God, he just put these things in my mind. Like
there's this fabulous David Mamet quote that I will also butcher because I did zero prep and it's not up in front of me, but where he talks about that very thing, that like books and movies, all these things that we do to tell each other stories, like the ones that stick with you are the ones that are not preaching at you, or they're not trying to hit you over the head with a message, but they are in and of themselves compelling because of the performances, because of the ideas, the themes, all of those kinds of things. And the mark of a great movie, or any kind of story, obviously David Lynch is prolific across a range of mediums, or not, well, David Lynch, but I mean David Mamet, but but Mamet was saying like the ones that stick with you and that you keep thinking about the next day and the next week and the next month afterwards, those are the ones that are really the greats, right? Which is interesting. I mean, I don't totally agree in that there are a lot of things that I have thought about for weeks and weeks after I've seen them out of rage, right? Like, there have been moments where I've been like, that was so, like the like Amazon's Wheel of Time series, for example. Or
no idea what that is. I definitely don't want to know. Yeah,
it's not worth going into, but I will say, there's tons of stuff like that, right? Like there are things that maybe stick with you because you're mad at them as a fan or what have you. But I do think for the most part that like great art is something that sticks with you, something that really like you keep revisiting and that just your memory just kicks back up a lot, and like anytime something relevant to that theme, or just you happen to see something that reminds you of it, and all those memories come back, and you just think about them all again. And I always find that to be such an incredibly powerful aspect of, the storytelling art forms. Right. Yeah.
The other week I was the open warm-up act at the Soho Forum debate that my boy Gene Epstein moderates.
So I get to see him in 2 weeks.
Nice.
I'm interviewing him over 2 days in New York. In fact,
fantastic.
2 weeks from now.
Gene's the best. I actually got to talk to him because I feel like it would be worth a lot to get him on the podcast more regularly, because he's fantastic. He's literally my oldest friend. So I get to be the warm up act for like a serious debate series, and Gene's so great to me. And beforehand, I was chatting with Nick Gillespie from Reason, and he's from New Jersey originally, so he was like, how's
he is
the kids in Jersey, and and all that. But then we started talking. I forget what we started talking about. How we got into talking about literature. And Nick has like a PhD,
freaking fountain of knowledge on literature.
Yeah. Nick has like a PhD in lit, and we started talking about The Great Gatsby. Oh yeah, it came up The Great Gatsby because he asked me, where I was from originally, which is Little Neck, and I was like, I'm not sure if that's East Egg or West Egg, and but then we kind of went down this whole rabbit hole of lit, and I hadn't talked about literature, God man, in so long. And all that stuff was in there. And it was like, oh man, like I'm really thankful that, that there was a time when I actually read books and absorbed enough of it. So I'm able to have, a fun conversation about it and the importance of it, years later.
Nick is a guy I think honestly, I don't think I've ever told him this, but I probably should. I probably have it.
Well, he's a regular listener to the show, so
well, I hope so, because I'm going to pay him a massive compliment here, which is that like Nick is a guy that I really like. There's a level of like depth of knowledge and knowledge of obscure, cultural references, literary references, artistic references, things like that. Nick has a massive library of that kind of stuff to a degree that I really aspire to in a lot of ways. And I can only think there's only one other person in my life who I think has ever been kind of close to that. Well, there's a couple people in different contexts, but like I remember when I was in college, my composition professor was this guy. First of all, he had just an insane resume, and his career was expansive in the craziest ways. Like one time I submitted a piece for him to review and give me his feedback on and whatever. And he asked me, he said, "Oh, this kind of sounds like there was like a circus music vibe to it that he commented upon." And he goes, "Well, have you ever worked in a circus band?" Like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like he was like, "Oh yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I worked at a circus band for like 5 years," like stuff like that, you know. But
wait, you did work in a circus?
No, I didn't.
Band?
He did.
Oh, he did.
No, he did. It was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know that about him until
he's like, "This reminds me of have you ever had a bear balance on a ball?"
Yeah, you ever like that. Like, how do you have this? Like, yeah, he was like music director for a circus at one point. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he was the kind of guy who could just pick up any instrument. And whenever I would bring him something, it didn't matter if it was for saxophone or bass or flute or bassoon or any, whatever, violin, he would just pick up a violin and be like, "Oh, okay, well, let's just play this and see how it sounds," and that level of facility across such a wide range of artistic mediums, instruments, performing mediums, and then Nick's level of facility across pop culture.
Yeah.
Because Nick is not just an encyclopedia of books, and it's like old TV shows, old radio shows, like movies. Like Nick, man, that's just, it's just something that I've always really, really loved and admired about that guy. And it's really cool to me.
Yeah. My wife is was a professional trained dancer.
Mm-hmm.
She graduated from the University of the Arts. And, there's been times where she's, where I've been kind of on the outside of conversations she's having about dance itself. And it's stuff that, she and I don't have those in-depth conversations because I'm very much a layman when it comes to dance. But to hear her kind of talking
great
about all this stuff with such, detail and I
love it.
All this minutia, I love it. And it's so attractive too.
This is how I've kind of tried to set up my social media as much as I can is I usually try to follow people who are not really polemicists or kind of bomb throwers in any kind of way. Like not usually. I mean, I've got a couple of those kind of people around, of course, but like I'm mostly interested in deep expertise on things. And like anybody who's super passionate about something, even if it's something that I know maybe especially if I don't know anything about it at all, those are the ones that I'm really, really interested in. So somebody like when you can connect that depth of knowledge with excitement.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, I want to share this with everyone because it's so cool.
Yeah.
Like those are the kind of people I like being around and having conversations with most of the time.
Well, I get that a lot with Rick Beato. On YouTube because he'll have these
I was literally
hours long conversations with other musicians where they're getting into complex music theory, which I have no idea. I mean, they might as well be speaking
I
Russian.
speak that language very well.
You speak it very well. I don't speak it at all, and yet it's soothing and interesting for me.
It's funny to me that you bring up Rick because literally Sunday morning I was over at my buddy's house, who is Rick Beato's producer.
Really?
And yes.
Wow.
And Rick called him in the middle of our chat. So nice. I know what Rick is doing next week right now. But actually, no, I know what Rick is doing today, right now. But anyway, Rick is fantastic. And I don't watch his show as regularly as I probably should, but I do tend to check it out anytime he does like a deep dive on he's on a song, on an individual song or a band. Like I'm really there for all that. And I've loved all the interviews that he's done. And my buddy who was who I trained and was my assistant producer for many, many years, actually shoots all those interviews now. So, or most of them.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. With, with all the stuff that we're talking about, and, the work that we've done, for various nonprofits and, in our own work, the idea of being able to change the culture, seems to be at the front of mind of so many, people and all that. But I think so we just had the Super Bowl, we had the halftime show. I didn't watch the halftime show.
I didn't watch
the game. It was about this. It was the second half and I was trying to figure out how to play it through Hulu and it just wasn't working. So I gave up. So everything that I did was just in response to people commenting on it and all that. But with the halftime show, I think it was pretty clear that there are a lot of people who, one didn't know who Kendrick Lamar was, even though he's one of the most popular, performers.
We live in a weird world now, man.
So they don't know who he is or what he was doing exactly. Yeah. And it's sort of if you don't have a handle on the current culture, how can you possibly, play a part in it or bring it back? Because what we've been talking about, right? You and I, we bring up Rick Beato, who a lot of his stuff is looking back on what makes this song great and all that, talking about literature, even,
hundreds of years old,
all this stuff. It's and maybe it's because we're, kind of the same generation. We're kind of looking back at what's great and not necessarily living in the past, because I think a lot of stuff that was great is still great. And can be experienced, especially for the first time if you haven't done it yet.
It's one of my all-time favorite things about YouTube, to be honest, is that you can go back. I watched, obviously I'm not old enough to have watched this in person, but I've watched things like Live Aid, from 1995 or whatever with, Freddie Mercury's final performance. And there are great video recordings of that performance, or of Prince, or of the Beatles, or you name it, right? You can go back and look at all this stuff. And that's only true of the last, roughly 100 years, right? That's crazy. And it's absolutely incredible that you as a young person today have access to you don't just only listen to Kendrick Lamar, right? You do. You don't have to. You can listen to every one of his influences in the early 2000s and the late 90s, early 90s in hip hop. You can take that back to Quincy Jones in the 80s, 70s, 60s. You can take that back to Duke Ellington if you want to, Louis Armstrong, Delta blues people. There's all this stuff that, just in that one line from Delta blues on to hip hop. Yeah. Right. You could go on 10,000 different tangents just from that one line and find countless incredible performers, incredible artists, incredible cultural shapers. Right. And I do find that our overall sort of the nonprofit network that I worked for lags behind, I guess, a lot of the time on that kind of stuff, just because a lot of the people who are in it don't put a lot of focus on it. They don't care, or they get, in some cases, they're kind of hostile to it in ways, which I always think is kind of bizarre. Yeah. People are hostile. Whenever you see somebody who's hostile, there's a little bit of a sour grapes aspect where people are all these celebrities are, lefty socialists who, support all these things that I don't like or whatever. And then you go, well, yeah, but you also basically shit on them every day, all day. So they're not going to be your friends.
Right.
But you could also start writing your own screenplays and
and how much stuff is just, in response to whatever the other side is doing, as opposed to just making your own your own great stuff. So I think
very, very different reacting to somebody versus expressing your own ideas.
I wonder, even just the idea, this grand idea of, quote unquote, changing the culture. I don't even know. I don't necessarily
I really
mean, for one, there are multiple cultures, at play too.
I was having that conversation yesterday with a friend of mine about the Super Bowl. Actually, she was talking about how, and which is funny because she was like explaining it to me like I don't know what a diss track is, and I was like, my darling, I know no Vaseline.
I know. Yeah, I know. What's it? KRS-One gave like the first roast, basically. Yeah.
I was around when Ice Cube was battling, like NWA people were doing all that kind of stuff back in the early 90s. But I was talking with her about this and about the idea that like, and I just looked it up yesterday, Seinfeld's finale had something like 75 million viewers live on prime time.
Yeah.
Right. I looked it up. The average Tonight Show episode with Johnny Carson averaged something in the neighborhood of 50 million views. Can you, it's insane, but the reality is today, everything is so split up and so bifurcated and everything is like all over the place to where you can have a niche culture that is legitimately like maybe only a small percentage of the American population, maybe 20% or even less of the American population that the other 80% literally doesn't know anything about at all.
Yeah.
And yet the people who are the stars to that 20% are multi-millionaires, the biggest, stars imaginable. And, TV shows now even, if you get 8 million viewers on a TV show,
it's unreal.
It'd be incredible, right?
Yeah.
Fox News was dominating all of their competing news with like 5 million a night, 4 million a night, it is wild. And then Walter Cronkite, I'm sure, got 30, 40 million easily.
Yeah, I'm sort of, so.
But it's very split up now. So
I think it's totally split up. I think probably a better way of looking at it is rather than, change the culture, it's like, no, like foster and develop your own culture.
Just contribute.
Because the idea, like, I'd written this, something I posted this a while back, where I'm kind of looking at myself and I'm like, I'm probably as funny as I'll ever get and probably as good of a writer as I'll ever be,
I think you'll get a little bit better over time.
Everybody does. Maybe, like there's some things I've done that have been really funny and it's like, I don't know if I could break that, but I've sort of accepted like,
I have some of those moments when I go listen to old recordings of myself. I'm like, that was pretty good. Yeah. Like, I don't know if I could even do that now. Like,
but also it's like, even if I, on the off chance I were, I was able to get funnier. The reality is I'm not looking to like bring people over to me who have no interest in me whatsoever. It's like, no, there are a lot of people who enjoy my stuff and people who will enjoy my stuff.
It's also not really a competition. You're
I'm competing with you, Sean.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. No, look, I think that first of all, I think everybody, and this is another kind of social media-ish thing, there's the external comparison thing doesn't really interest me a whole lot most of the time, because I think that everybody's too unique to do that. And I would go like, I don't even know, a lot of the time, I'm not even sure who I would compare you to from a stand-up standpoint. Right. Actually, I'm kind of curious about that. Who are some of your biggest influences from a stand-up?
Yeah, I get that all the time. I think I probably the ones I grew up watching are probably the same ones that you grew up watching. George Carlin, Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, later Patrice O'Neill, Martin Lawrence.
Patrice, I get a little bit of Patrice vibe from you for sure. I think of guys like Jeselnik when I think of you.
Well, I have the occasional witty dark one-liner.
You have a lot of dark one-liners. What are you talking about?
I don't even know my own body of work.
Dark premises in any case. Like you've got a lot of darker premises in a lot of the stuff that you've worked on or written or whatever. But like even the James Bond thing that I was so proud, man, to watch that thing blow up and like Musk shared it and all this kind of stuff. It's super cool. But like that Bond thing is like, it's actually pretty dark. Like it's not a pleasant story.
Well, also, Well, in the comedy that I do too, I mean, one of the things that's, it's not necessarily like what bifurcation, because it's because I do stand up, but I also do, the sketch comedy, and then I also do, other, things in comedy,
writing,
like the written word and stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it is something where, maybe like the sketch comedy I do might be, quite different than like the stand up, comedy that I do, just because there's certain themes or stories or jokes or angles that are just
they work in different
more. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I've liked working in animation a lot, and sort of doing a comedy series with animation is really fun because you aren't really constrained very much.
Right.
Like we could do, it would be very different than your Bond sketch, but we could go, full bore on something like that in a way that you really can't in person, right? Like you can't in a live action context, just because you can't afford to, go into Monaco's casino or whatever, you know what I mean? But I can do that in animation, right? Like we can set something in the James Bond casino. We can have sharks with laser beams attached to their backs and stuff. Like we can do that in animation, but I can't do that anywhere else. But I don't know, man. At the end of the day, I do think that it's really more just a question of like jumping in and participating and contributing things and like trying things out. And I just feel like a lot of people in our network have talked for years about producing more stories, doing comedy, doing narrative films, doing documentaries. Like there's all these kinds of things that people talk about a lot. And then whenever it comes time to like do them, either people are really tightly hamstrung by like, no, but it's got to include this phrase, and it's got to say this exactly this way, or we've got to do it this way. And well, we can't do it about that subject because one of my donors is upset about this, or, there's all these little rules that you get put on all this stuff that I think it's so exciting to see somebody like you who can operate in both spaces where you've got your own stuff. You've also got some client stuff like that works, but like you can also go out there and just show what's possible if you're kind of out there on your own,
Thanks, man.
But I think of like, I have, I think, you probably know him a lot better than I do, but like Clifton Duncan.
Oh yeah.
Who, talks about this stuff a lot. And I really, Clifton, and I think, almost everything he's ever said about this, I think I just agree with emphatically, which is like, you've got to actually start participating. You've got to write the operas, the musicals, the movies. You've got to write TV shows. You've got to try to get them on air, or develop your own platforms, develop your own shows on YouTube. But that's really all it is. And I think if you spend your life trying to worry about whether or not you're better than like Dave Chappelle, you're playing a bad game, and also you're going to lose because it's Dave Chappelle.
Well, I think that totally. I think sort of where I'm coming from is the idea of worrying about fitting into the other culture, or whatever the dominant culture is.
Yeah, you don't need to just make your own stuff.
Just make your own stuff, because like
everybody's mad at that. Like there's huge percentage of the population that doesn't even like, quote, the other culture.
No, totally. Like so like for example, like last year, I got to open for Rob Schneider on a number of dates, which was fucking awesome. It was so amazing. And there were times where like I was selling my book outside, so like the fans would be Rob's fans would be coming by, and the amount of people who had recognized me from Gutfeld, and it was like, here's this cross-pollination where Gutfeld is the biggest friggin' late night show, and it's like, wow, like here I am. Like someone saw me on TV and then they recognized me on stage.
That's a fascinating thing though, dude. Like the fact that Greg Gutfeld has literally the top rated late night show. Yeah. And yet the Hollywood press, Variety, Deadline, et cetera, like they do not even recognize Gutfeld as a late night host. Right.
Right.
They treat it like I don't even know really. Like, it's another news show. It's another commentary show on Fox, whatever.
And it is like,
it is.
It's a really fun show to be on as a comic.
Yeah.
And it's a unique show because I think like probably like the closest show that it's like would probably be like Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect. From back in the day.
Yeah,
and it's
I think that's about right.
You have no other show that's like
they used to have. Well, he does now with Real Time too, I guess, having that kind of panel. But his show, I like Maher's show in general, but it's a little over formatted to me. Like, I think the the segments are too short, and I don't think he really has time to let arguments breathe a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Whereas I used to watch Politically Incorrect when I was growing up.
Loved it. That was
and I loved it. And I used to when I finally took over, my brother got the basement room, so he got to have the room that was away from my parents, and
he had more hair at the time. We didn't have to tell him about him losing it.
Yeah. Whereas my bedroom was literally like right next door to my parents, so like I could not stay up late and like watch TV or do anything
or masturbate loudly. Because
I mean that would not be a wise move for sure. But then I got the basement room, and because the TV was in the basement, I would stay up late. My parents would not necessarily know that I was watching TV at 11:30 at night or whatever, watching Politically Incorrect Bill Maher. But all those shows, I mean, I think are interesting because they all kind of converged in a sense, right? Like if you look at Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel or, even Fallon to some extent, maybe a lesser extent, like Kimmel and Colbert especially are just so news heavy, and they have news makers on their show, and they talk about news, and they talk about all this stuff, and they are not really just doing like funny bits and things like Conan or Craig Ferguson used to do, And so I think that if you're not going to call Gutfeld, like Gutfeld's dominating them, right? He's actually dominating Kimmel.
100%. Yeah.
And I think they're actually competing directly. But that is interesting because it means that there is a sizable audience that wants comedy, but wants it from a different perspective than they get from Kimmel. And yet there really aren't that many comics out there delivering that.
Yeah. No, totally. And it becomes, I was listening to a podcast a few days ago. I forget what they were talking about exactly, but they're like, they were basically, the argument they were making is like, you see this move all the time where you have, say, conservative or, right of center studios, production companies or whatever that find their audience, cater to their audience, whether it's like movies about faith, etc. They build up their audience, and then they're like, you know what? We got to get the left to start liking us. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this movie about this, and then they tank, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, you built an audience, and it's not about pandering to your audience or talking down to them. It's like, no, finding interesting stories that speak to your audience that the other side isn't doing.
To be fair, I do think that there are a lot of people who do that who I don't know. I mean, I won't call it audience capture, but I will say that, like, look, I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist my entire life. Like, most of the Christian movies, TV shows, music, all that kind of stuff has not appealed to me, not only because ideologically, like, it doesn't particularly appeal to me, but because it's badly made a lot of the time. I love things like, I mean, I certainly didn't, I wasn't the biggest fan of like Passion of the Christ for like the subject matter and whatnot, but as a feat of filmmaking, it's an insane thing. Right?
Mel Gibson. It's funny to be able to say that Mel Gibson is underrated because but he is 100. Like, you just think of it, it's like, no. And so how could he possibly be underrated? But yet he is.
But like Martin Scorsese has made numerous films that incorporate Catholic, like deeply Catholic.
Silence is
one of my, and Silence I do love. I think Silence is a phenomenal
painful movie.
It's a painful movie to watch. It's a hard rewatch if you ever try.
It made me hate the Japanese even more.
Never mind. I won't go into this tangent.
Yeah, don't go. We don't have much time. We don't have much time.
I did an out of frame episode about, if you remember the What's Wrong with Wakanda episode about isolationism, and I had, in the responses to that episode, I got tons of people telling me how great Japan was during the Edo period, and I was like, it was not. It was not great.
Not a good time.
But yeah. Anyway, yeah, Scorsese. I mean, I think if you do that really well, and you focus, again, not on preaching to your audience, right? Like, that really became the issue, and it became one of the animating things for me for the last several years, is like in the kind of like the anti-woke realm of things, is like, I keep trying to explain to people that, like, the theme of the story isn't the problem, right? It's not a problem for you to tell a story about, racism or sexism or some other kind of bigotry. There's nothing. In fact, there are great movies going back 100 years that cover those kinds of themes, but they become really bad when you start harassing your audience and preaching at your audience and telling them that they're dumb and that they're bad people and all those kinds of things. If your goal shifts from telling a really compelling story towards changing people's minds and preaching at them and yelling at them for being bad in your, moral conception of things, you're going to make a bad movie. And when I was growing up, it was Christians who did that. It was almost invariably like, every religious movie I ever saw was like VeggieTales, but done for the big screen, mm-hmm. and it was unpalatable to me. It was like completely impossible to watch. Now I look at, guys like the Harmon folks, Angel Studios and what they're doing. And I see people on that side actually trying to tell good stories, done well. Actually doing it well. And I think that they will make a difference doing that. And I'm not even aligned with them on a lot of stuff, like there's a lot of stuff that I disagree with them about or would disagree with them about, but I'm just excited to see a more legitimately diverse range of people doing interesting things and trying to do them well, instead of just accepting that, like, they can capture, some percentage of, like, deeply Christian moms who won't allow their kids to watch, ABC or whatever. Right. But I don't know, man. I'd like to see more people from more perspectives telling more good stories. And I'd especially like to see more people from, our kind of pro individualism individual freedom, capitalism kind of realm, telling those stories. And, it's kind of lonely out here still, actually. Well,
then you get that phone call from Rick Beato.
And then the question that I keep
overhear a story.
I keep wanting to ask Rick Beato really obscure questions about music, by the way, mm-hmm. that I've never had the occasion to actually do. Like, why, for example, does Living on a Prayer open with finger symbols? I bet you didn't even know that it does.
No, I'm going to have to.
Go listen to Living on a Prayer. The very first thing that happens is ching, 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 ching. And that's finger symbols.
Oh, shoot.
Who made that choice?
Yeah.
I'd like Rick to tell me.
I think is that a Sambora choice? I don't know.
I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know who decided it. I don't know if it was the producer. I don't know if it was the band.
A question that I've had is, there was a time, like in the 90s, where we were just like, okay, every singer is going to go, like that's like that.
That's
like,
Eddie Vedder's fault, though. That's very obviously Eddie Vedder's fault.
Eddie Vedder, he's patient zero of the.
Yeah, I think so.
Of the dog, like.
I think so. By the way, if we're going to end this on Pearl Jam, my wife is going to hate us because
we could.
She viscerally reacts to Pearl Jam.
Oh, really?
Like a negative. Oh, she hates Pearl Jam. So
I think that 10 is a freaking masterpiece.
I just strongly dislike Pearl Jam. She legitimately hates Pearl Jam.
Shit. Well, look, I think we'll end it on that. If we could end it on hate for Pearl Jam, and then hopefully my next guest will show some love for Pearl Jam. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just experienced a little over an hour with my good friend Sean Malone, who I hope to work with again soon because he's super talented and he's been a wonderful pal in this space for years and years. So thank you, Sean.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Lou.